Yeah, they actually have their own secular organization within the company. It's called the Secular Professional Alliance at Walmart. And we actually have one of the founders here today to speak to us about it. So I want you to welcome Shon Clements.
Unequal pleasure of being the last speaker of the day, so I'm going to keep it relatively short, and then probably we'll have a little bit of question and answers at the end, and then try to get everyone out of here hopefully a little bit early. So first, I just want to say how really pleased and hopeful it makes me to see that we even have this Logicon here. I think that it's really great, especially in this part of the country, that we have such a presence. And I think one of the things that my group has tried to do, sorry, I have some technical difficulties. So one of the things that my group has tried to do, and one of the reasons behind what we are, is so that we can help to provide a sense of community for our fellow agnostics and atheists, right? I think that probably the first and hardest thing that you lose when you come out of the closet as an atheist is that sense of community, because so much of what, for most Americans, so much of what we are brought up as far as social gatherings go really is built around church, right? I mean, it's where you spend your weekends, it's where you spend Wednesdays, it's where you have your friends and your family. So I think there are a lot of people that I've talked to that describe themselves as cultural Christians, and they don't necessarily believe the tenets, but they like the sense of community that Christianity provides for them, right? They like having a place to go on the weekends. One of the things I think that this really is hopefully helping us to build in the atheist community is sort of a counterpoint for that, right? We can go out and do things. We get together with some frequency, and we just kind of go and hang out and talk about mostly politics, because that seems to be where we tend towards. But I think that a lot of it really is just about that sense of community, and that's something that is, as I mentioned, really missing. So a little bit about my group. We are the Secular Professionals Alliance at Walmart. So about 2 years ago, it was during the National Day of Prayer, which I'm sure, as all of you know, is also the National Day of Reason. At the home office in Walmart, they had the Interfaith Symposium. And it was a really interesting sort of presentation that they had. There were representations from all of the Abrahamic religions, as well as Hinduism and a few other religions. There was maybe 8 or 9 people on the panel. What they did not have was any representation from the atheist or the agnostic community. Now, the symposium was fascinating. I've always been fascinated by religion, and it was really interesting to hear everyone talk just about sort of their own, personal beliefs and how that impacts their lives. After the symposium was done, I got up and gave some comments. That I mentioned that as well as being the National Day of Prayer, it was the National Day of Reason, and for our group to be excluded from the Interfaith Symposium was at least in some way to imply that we didn't have faith. And I thought that was pretty insulting, right? I absolutely have faith. I have faith in science. I have faith in reason. I have a promise of eternal reward or eternal damnation. That's what I choose to put my faith in. So I was pretty passionate about the comments that I gave, because I'm just a passionate person and I like giving good comments. And I found out later, at the time it was the chief diversity officer of the company who reached out to me and said that they did not have representation from the atheist community, not because they had failed to ask, but because no one failed to step in for it. No one was willing to go on stage and talk about the fact that they were an atheist. And I saw there a pretty big opportunity and a pretty big space that we really needed to do something. About. So that same person put me in contact with a few folks, and we started the very laborious process of putting together the Secular Professionals Alliance at Walmart. And I would say that everyone here who has any sort of history with trying to provide direction to a group of atheists, you understand that it's kind of like trying to herd a bunch of cats, right? We are necessarily very opinionated people. We all have our own ideas about what we want to do and about what we don't want to do. So it was not exactly easy, even for those of us that wanted to be a part of the group, right? Because we all wanted to get something different out of the Secular Professionals Alliance. But we persevered, right? We continued to put forward what we thought our group ought to be, and I'll talk a little bit about that. As I was putting the group together, one of the things that really kept me going, because it does get a little bit disheartening when you have this great idea about what you want to do, and then the execution of it really kind of starts to fall apart, right? You have all of these great aspirations about how we're going to be a voice for the disenfranchised. We're going to be a voice for the little guy who doesn't get to speak for himself. And then everyone's kind of butting heads, and it becomes sort of difficult, and it really becomes easy to just say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm going to drop it. One of the things that really drove me to continue to form the group was I was having a conversation with a person who was a director of human resources in the largest company in the United States. And as I was having a conversation with him about what I wanted to do, he told me that his biggest concern for me is what it would do for my career, right? So think about that for a moment. His biggest concern is what it would do for my career working for the largest company in the United States. And I told him that is exactly the point of why the group needs to exist. Because that phrase should never even be uttered. It shouldn't even be a consideration that you're concerned about what it's going to do to my career. I had another person who actually was a senior level member of our Global Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And as I was speaking to him, and we were having sort of a high-level conversation just about morals, and he told me that as a Christian, he didn't understand how someone could follow Christ's example, is basically what he said. He didn't understand how someone could follow Christian principles if they were not religious, right? And again, that's something that obviously is a pretty big problem that we need to address. So as I continued to do research, I discovered that atheists are consistently ranked as the least trusted and most hated of all minority groups. That's in the United States of America in 2016. Think about when you turn on your television, all of the rhetoric and vitriol that you hear against Muslims, right? Specifically Muslims. And then think for a minute that the atheist community is actually more hated and more mistrusted than any other minority community. Despite being statistically a more educated, higher earning, and more socially responsible member of society. One of the most telling statistics that I came across was they did a poll for the members of the National Science Academy. Now, the people that responded, 93% of those people self-identified as non-religious, as atheist and agnostic. 93% of the National Science Academy's group of members that responded. If you look at the prison population, it is 0.1%. So obviously, atheists are doing something right. They're being very productive and valued members of society. So while I was reading all of these bleak statistics about how this country views atheists, I was also reading some really encouraging statistics. And the really encouraging statistics are how atheism and non-religion in general is growing in this country, right? It really has, over the last 10 or 15 years, taken off. So if you look at millennials, if you look at people that are younger than 25, a full third of them, 33%, self-identify as non-religious. So how does that math work? How are we at the same time growing and becoming a very large part of the population? How are we at the same time still statistically the most hated and feared group that is in the U.S. today? right? So where does that perception come from? That group that is statistically more successful, more educated, more productive, more socially responsible, consistently show in polls to be the most hated and distressed, right? And the answer is pretty simple. The answer is ignorance, right? That's absolutely what it is. And the only way that you can combat ignorance is through education. That's it, right? So the real question is, how do you get someone to listen? How do you educate someone when they won't listen to you, right? How do you get someone to listen? How do you educate them when they are so convinced of their own beliefs that they ignore all evidence? How do you educate someone when they are so convinced of their own source of morality that they can't even fathom someone acting moralistically in the absence of that source? Right? Someone who's so convinced of their understanding of their own beliefs that they're willing to kill or die in the name of those beliefs. I have seen what religious zealotry can do, and you can very reasonably question someone's belief system. You can question the source of where they get it from, but you should never question a zealot's level of what's the word I'm looking for? I just jumped right out of my head, right? You can never question the... Geez. Apparently I didn't even type it down. As I was typing it last night, I couldn't think of it either, and I just left a blank spot. You can never question their resolve, right? You can never question a zealot's resolve. I think that any of us who lived through September 11th can speak to that, right? You can question what they had going through their minds, but you cannot question their unquestionable belief that what they had going through their minds was right, that it was correct for them. And you can't educate someone by railing against them. You can shout until you are hoarse, but if their ears are not open, they are not going to hear you. And the best way to think about that is, think about when you're flipping through the channels driving on Sunday and you turn on some evangelical presentation, right? How quickly do you change the channel? Or even as you're listening to it, you immediately disregard everything they say because you know that it's just wrong. You know that that information just isn't accurate. People who have their religious beliefs feel the exact same way about what we are saying to them, right? So you can rail against it, you can shout against it, but they're not listening to you, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change that perception. So let me say first that we absolutely need people to rail against religion and the persecution of atheists and agnostics. That absolutely has to happen. We have to have someone who stands up and says why we have rights, right? Someone who stands up and explains that this is a free country and freedom of religion is also freedom from religion, right? Not that that was a plug for Dan Barker, which my group sponsored, by the way. That's absolutely the way that it ought to be, right? We need someone who's in court fighting for our rights. That is us telling people why we exist. Us telling people why we are atheists. What that doesn't do is it doesn't help us show them how we exist and how we do the things that we do. So as we were putting together our Secular Professionals Alliance at Walmart, we wanted to come up with what were the pillars of our group so that we could be a positive force in our company and in our community, right? For us, it's a little bit different because we are all professionals, right? We all do have to go to work every day, so we can't be maybe as vocal as we would like to be at sometimes. So we wanted to think about what that needed to look like, and we came up with our mission statement. Our mission is to emphasize the value of goodness of human beings, their common human needs, and provide a network for secular associates and their supporters, making secularism an important and accepted part of the Walmart culture. Very verbose, but we do that by approaching in 4 different pillars. And I'm really just going to touch on one of the pillars that we have in my group, and that pillar is charity, right? So what we try to do is, instead of providing that ever vocal opposition to those that are very religious, we try to sort of sneak in the back door, right? We try to provide an example of behavior that it becomes difficult for someone to reconcile with their own misconceptions about atheists, right? So we do that primarily through charity events in our community by volunteering, right? We volunteer at the women's shelter, we volunteer at the Samaritan House, which is actually ran by a religious entity. We volunteer at the dog shelter, because who doesn't love dogs? And we volunteer at, where else did we go? I'm missing one here. The soup kitchen. And the reason that we do that is so that when people see us out there volunteering our hours, it's not so easy for them to say that we are morally lacking, right? And if you really think about that, what the definition of charity is, if we are people who understand quite clearly that we are not going to be eternally punished or eternally rewarded for the things that we do in this life, then that means that we really are being charitable. We are donating our time with the clear understanding that it's the only time that we get so that we can make the world a better place. And I know that that sounds kind of cheesy, it sounds kind of corny, but that's absolutely how you can change someone's mind, right? You can change someone's perception, and we clearly have a pretty big perception problem. So, you know, most of you probably, as I was coming up, were asking yourselves, you know, who is this guy? I do not have a book that I'm hawking. I do not have a website or a newsletter or a blog that I'm trying to get subscribers to. I'm just a regular guy with a regular job. But I think that as we move forward in trying to make secularism not only available to people, but accepted by people, right? We need the people on the front lines that are going to make it available. They're going to fight for our rights. They're going to rail against the oppression of the majority. And I will be the first person there to shout all the same things and to stand up for what our rights are. But just because something is allowable doesn't mean it's accepted, right? And we also need the guys who every day are going in and providing an example that it makes someone difficult to still have those misconceptions about them, right? I go to work every day and I talk to my colleagues about the things that I do, and I have people that I work with that are very red, that are very religious, and when I tell them the things that my group and I have done over the weekend, hey, we went out and we fed homeless people for 4 hours. What did you do? Right? You know, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to disregard my existence and the value of that. So that is, you know, sort of what we are trying to do. I feel like it's working. I feel like we're starting to get somewhere. It's still very difficult. The level of acceptance in this part of the country, especially, you know, as much as we have a full third of millennials are atheists, in Northwest Arkansas, 97% of the population in general identify as Christian. So we have a little bit more of an uphill battle in this part of the country specifically. As I was saying before, for us, it really is just about making someone question that, right? So, and the way I always explain it when I'm talking to people is, you know, I feel like atheism is the next thing that is socially acceptable, even though it's morally wrong to criticize and to disenfranchise atheists, right? 120 years ago, it was suffrage, right? It was socially acceptable that women didn't have the right to vote. And if you talk to anyone logically, obviously that was a problem, right? 70 years ago, it was Jim Crow laws. It was socially acceptable that a black person had to drink from a separate water fountain, even though logically that was completely wrong. 20 years ago, it was the LGBT movement, right? It was socially acceptable to persecute that group of people. Where we're at now, it's still socially acceptable to hate atheists, and people absolutely hate atheists. So much so that when I was talking to potential members for my group, everyone that is in my group are relatively low-ranking people in Walmart. because anyone who was in a director's position or above was absolutely unwilling to join our group. And they always said the same thing: I really appreciate what you're doing, I really support what you're doing, but I'm afraid what that's going to do to my career, and I can't be party to that, right? Which is the exact argument for why we exist. So it absolutely is still true. In fact, in this state, in 7 states, we are legally disenfranchised. An atheist in Northwest Arkansas cannot serve on a jury, right? Because the whole state. The whole state of Arkansas, I cannot serve on a jury because I do not kind of believe in a higher power, right? And that's still on the books, it still exists. I don't know how much it is enforced, but the fact that it is there is repugnant and it ought to be removed. So what we are trying to do within very, we don't have a lot of pull, we don't have a lot of power, we're just trying to provide a consistent, moralistically positive approach. And we are trying to, change hearts and minds against those who dislike atheists. And that's pretty much it. So what kind of questions do you guys have? Yes?
Do you have any religious associations within Walmart?
Well, we do. So we are considered an associate interest group, right? So you have associate resource groups, which are sort of sponsored by the company, and they are kind of protected. Pride is an associate resource group. We are an associate interest group, and there are hundreds of them. You can have an interest group for, I like Jeeps. So there certainly are a lot of religious groups that have the same sort of status as we do. We have been trying to become an ARG. It's kind of difficult to get that status. And everyone, when you talk to them, they say the same thing, why can you have a group, but a religious person can't have a group? For the same reason that our company doesn't sponsor, straight white pride group, right? Like that's just not appropriate because those aren't the ones that need protection. So we're still working on that, but right now we are just an interest group and we are striving for everybody. Yes, ma'am?
Two things. Is that company-wide across the globe as far as who can join it, who can be active in it? Is there things that you guys could grow it and you have plans to try?
Yeah, and that's actually something that we sort of struggle with, right? It's getting the message out there. It's advertisement. Because we are just an associate interest group, we can't put things in our newsletter. We have a Facebook page that anyone obviously is welcome, and we welcome anyone. Matt actually joined us when he was still living out in San Antonio, right? Austin, sorry. When he was still living out in Austin. So we do have a few remote associates, but it's difficult for us to kind of get the word out there. Hopefully some people will be reading FFRF and see that we're a sponsor and we'll drum up some business.
And my second question is, what is the biggest piece of advice you can give to somebody who might be looking to start a similar group in a larger company as well, like in a conservative environment?
I would say you have to work through the shackles that are provided from HR in your company, right? And we did that. We immediately met with our chief diversity officer, and we kind of asked permission, as it were, kind of every step of the way, because we didn't want to be in a position where we could be shut down or we could be sort of relegated to the closet because we weren't following sort of the rules, right? So before we started our Facebook page, we got clearance for that. When we designed our emblem, we got clearance for that. Before we sponsored Dan for the Logicon here, we got clearance for that. We wanted to make sure that we were always working within those strictures so that that never became an excuse to belittle what we were trying to say. And I absolutely would recommend that. And if you don't get the response that you legally ought to be getting, then I think it's important. We luckily never had to, but then that's when you reach out to some of the other groups and you have to attack that from another angle. Yes?
Will you talk a little bit about the meeting you had with somebody that gave a lot of pushback against us forming a group? Okay.
Which one?
Which one? The one in which you had to have lunch and you had like an hour-long conversation over on the... Remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, which was really actually pretty interesting. So the chief diversity officer put me in contact with someone who was trying to start a religious group, sort of in the same vein as our non-religious group. And they were very vocal because initially, when we started the group, we actually were able to post just a blurb in the Walmart home office notices, right? It gets emailed out to everyone, and we really got a lot of traction on that. We had a lot of people who read it. I think that's how Matt learned about us. And it was great, but we had people that were complaining about it. One of the people that was complaining was a person who was trying to do the same thing with the religious group. So I met him for lunch, and we talked for maybe an hour and a half. And it was really an interesting conversation. I think that anyone who spends any sort of time with anyone from our group very quickly realizes that we don't eat babies, right? We don't. Most of us, Michelle, most of us don't eat babies. We don't burst into flames when we go under the threshold of a church. We're just normal people trying to do, what we believe is right for our community. And it was really positive for us. And I've actually kept in a little bit of contact with him. And we are planning, it hasn't come to fruition yet because he failed to get back to me, but we're planning on doing something, jointly for volunteering. The May after the symposium, once our group finally got off the ground, we had, on the next day of prayer / day of reason, we actually had tables set up in the hallway at the home office. And each of the tables sort of talked about a religious group, and we were kind of lame in our presentation. They had some group that looked like a 6th grade science project, right? They had like this thing with poster board that was built up, really beautiful stuff. We just had some cookies and the truth. So that's why I say, come to us, we've got cookies and the truth, and that's all we got for you.
I'm known for cookies.
Yeah, red velvet cookies, so they were pretty delicious. But we actually talked a lot with a person from the Jewish community, and it was really fascinating to hear him speak because he considers himself a secular Jew, right? So he is essentially a cultural Jew. He doesn't necessarily believe in the tenets behind it, but it is a very important social thing for him. So that's one of the groups that we really want to try and do something jointly, right? We want to make sure that whenever there is a gathering or a presentation for the religious community, that we are also included in that, right? There is another option. It's not necessarily the most popular option, but there is another, option that's out there. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about, kind of going back to the beginning of your discussion, when you were talking about faith, and that you were, I can't remember the exact word you used, but offended or bothered that they assume that you have faith, you still can have faith in science, and you have faith in reason. And I was just curious what your definition of faith was, because to me, faith is believing something without evidence. So if you have evidence, there's something what's your definition?
Maybe I used too broad a definition then. For me, I believe in the power of reason, right? I don't know that science is going to cure cancer, but I believe in science's ability to cure cancer because of how that approach works. I don't know that humankind is going to do the right things, and we often do the wrong things, but I have faith in our capacity to do the right things. For me, when I talk about faith, it is the things that, makes the world not such a cold and kind of lonely place, because I believe that we can do better, even if we don't, and I have faith in our capacity to do that. So, and a lot of times, to your point, it is a belief without evidence, and a lot of times when you believe in humankind's capacity for goodness, the evidence points in exactly the opposite direction, but I still feel like it's there. It's still something that gives me purpose. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I just had a comment on the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers website of Reason to Rock. You had a guy talk on workplace discrimination. And the title is, "Am I an employer discriminate based on religious beliefs?" So she might check that talk out.
Okay.
It's on our YouTube. Yeah, it's on our YouTube channel.
Did you guys hear that?
What?
Would you repeat that? Sorry.
Oh, yes. Years ago, we have a conference called Reason to Rock, we had a guy come talk to us about workplace discrimination. And the topic was, can my employer discriminate based on my religious beliefs? Basically said no, it's illegal. And there's a YouTube video of us talk.
From Arkansas Society.
Yeah.
Arkansas Society of Freethinkers?
Well,
I think Ben Hassan, right, has, you know, even though he's taking the stance of, I don't want to get involved, has said if you ever have a problem, you can bring it to me.
And I would say that in general, Walmart has a pretty low perception as like where they stand morally, right? But from the inside, at least in the home office, it's actually pretty progressive in a lot of ways, right? They have a very vibrant pride group and community. They are very active about kind of stamping out intolerance, as it were. Now, we still get pockets of very stringent opposition to that, especially because of where we are. The logistics building, for instance, is a little bit different than the home office proper. But we actually are a pretty good company about that. And I think that there's a misconception about Walmart in general when it comes to that. Yeah.
I was just going to point out that there's a guy named Ben Hassan who's our new diversity inclusion person. And at a Saturday morning meeting recently, there was a guest speaker who was a very religious person in a very sort of right-wing religious way, and started to ask if he could lead everyone in prayer. And then the Psalm stood up and said, no, you can't. Basically told him, no, we're not going to do that here. And so...
and I think that he had to repeat it several times.
Several times. Well, surely, we're all of like mind here in the sort of thing, and then the Psalm kept trying to tell him. Because, we have a very wide, of course, a wide, diverse group of, Buddhists and Hindus and all sorts of religions, a lot of different Christian religions and denominations represented in those big Saturday morning meetings, and he just very bluntly took the man down. Ben Hassan, I might add, is our new diversity officer, and is a Muslim in his personal beliefs.
It's interesting, right? So Ben is a black guy, and he's Muslim. Our last chief diversity officer was a white female, and it's just interesting. Ben obviously is very passionate about what he does, but his experience is a little different, right? He grew up a black Muslim, so he has a real mindset of you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? If someone is stepping on your rights, you've got to yell back. You've got to, stand up for what's yours, which is great. But the point that I make to him is some people don't have bootstraps, right? Like that isn't always an appropriate response, and we need to provide a safe place for those people who don't feel comfortable, yelling back and speaking up. So it's been sort of a reset for us. I think when we had our last chief diversity officer, we were able to move quicker, I think, where now it seems like the mindset is just more like, hey, you guys just tough it out, we'll be okay, right? Where I still think we got a lot of work that we need to do.
Well, I think inclusion is your key.
Right.
For you specifically, maybe not for all of us, but for you and your company and your group, inclusion with the religious groups, showing everybody that you're standing united in the fact that you have the freedom of having what you believe to be true, and working together in charitable events, volunteerism, things like that. So, I really think that's the key for you, because if you can stand there and anybody who comes up and says, well, you guys are going to hell, blah, 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 you say, but we're working with the
Samaritan House.
whatever in there, and we all went last weekend together and fed them.
Yeah, so some of that should have rubbed off on us.
Right,
We should get a free pass.
Right. Tell them, maybe you shouldn't be given so much slack. And the bigger the company, which you are, the more people you have to start rubbing off on, and that's how you kind of get that out there. So that's great. The inclusion is where it's at.
We've also received a little bit of backlash against our own community too, saying, well, I don't want to be a part of the Samaritan House because
Yeah.
Right.
I don't want to be affiliated.
if you are in a position where you are marginalized and you're sort of disenfranchised for any period of time, when you get to a position that you have a platform to speak from, you have a tendency to be very negative, right? You have a tendency to really shout about all of the wrongs that have been done. And that's just not an approach that we can take with our group, right? That's just not something, that's not how we want to do it. So whenever we get those sort of comments, I mean, there are a myriad group of people where you can sort of express that and you can really rail against the religious and rail against all of the injustice that's out there. That's just not what our group is for. So we always, kind of say, hey, here's a local group and you guys can go and get together and you can do that and really get it out of your system. But when you're here in SPA, that's not the approach that we have to take, right? We've got to go to work every day. We have to operate within the confines of being professionals and working in the company. Yes, ma'am, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wonder, considering the high percentage of people in the LGBTQ community who are non-believers, if there are any natural alliances there that you formed. And you also said it was a large group, and I would consider that.
I have been stealing shamelessly from the Pride group for a couple of years now. I'm a member of Pride, and my sexuality is completely apart from the fact that I'm a member of Pride. I'm a heterosexual, but it would not be any different if I were homosexual or if I was transgender or anything else. I'm a member of Pride not so much because I believe in LGBT rights, but because I believe in human rights, right? So I've been a member of Pride for a couple of years now, and it was not long after I joined the group that I was like, hey man, this is something that I really think that we need for the atheist community as well. And I've been stealing shamelessly from, hey, like if you look at our pillars and you look at Pride's pillars, there's a lot of similarities. They look a lot alike. And one of our executive sponsors, one of the officers of the company is also an officer sponsor for Pride. So when Pride did their soiree, was that January they did that? When they did their soiree in January, we actually had our group go there as well. So we have maybe 5 or 6 members in our group that are also members of Pride, and we certainly are trying to we have a lot of life causes that we want to take advantage of. Yeah, Mike?
I was just going to say, partly to answer your question, I am also a member of Walmart Pride, and I am not a heterosexual. And,
what? I didn't know that.
So, this is quite a bit before we started the SPA group, we had a consideration for it. But I was at a Walmart Pride meeting, and it was a room maybe about half this size, but it was just buzzing with people. There were a lot of people. Pride had begun to invite and encourage straight allies to join the group, and you would be surprised how that supported us, which may say something about having some religious people who believe in our rights as atheists to also assist us. But I was in this group, and everyone was busy. Rosalind Brewer, who's the head of Sam's Club, CEO of Sam's Club, had come out very openly and talked about how that she had helped a lady when she was at Kimberly Clark, helped a lady come out at work, and how that she wanted everybody to bring their whole self to work. This was a big issue with them. And when it was just, the room was just buzzing with excitement. And I spoke up and I said, I haven't had as much trouble coming out as gay as I had with being an atheist and a Democrat. And there was a hush. There was, whoop. And I would like to think that a lot of that hush was, oh my God, what if they know that I'm an atheist? Or whatever. But there's still a lot of stigma with both the politics that I mentioned, which is actually the side point, but also about being an atheist, and which is another reason that our group needs to exist.
And I would just say that I am constantly surprised at just how brave the members of my group are, right? I mean, these guys literally every time we get together, every time we have a table, they really are putting their careers on the line, right? It's really easy to not let people know that you're an atheist. It's really easy to stay in the closet about that. That is why we have such a perception problem. It is why we are the most hated and distrusted group of people in the country, is because it's easy to just not let people know that about you. So if we could all give my group those on a weekly basis, it really is something.
I just really wanted to quickly reiterate one thing, and that's when it comes to the inclusion aspect of it. There was, whenever I first joined SPAL, there was some debate back and forth, especially with supporting some of the more religious charities. But I know we have at least one member who is religious. She's married to an atheist, but she is a member of SPAL because she supports the secular community. And Michelle's shaking her head.
She's come out as atheist
Oh,
now.
okay, she's ruining my point here.
I'm
What I was
sorry.
going to say is,
Or our plans to convert her to come to fruition.
well, what I was going to say is that I see that with a lot of secularists, especially younger atheists, there's anger towards religion, anger towards religious people. And if you're planning to have a group or an organization, don't be afraid to allow someone who is of a religion to come in, especially if they're supportive to the group. That's just like how Pride is allowed for those of us who are heterosexual to come in and say, we support you, we are there with you, we want to stand beside you. If the religious person isn't coming in to cause issues, if they are there to support or maybe just learn from you, don't be afraid to let them in.
Yeah, and that's really how you're going to get asses in the seats, right?
Yeah.
That really is. You bring people in that have the sort of personality to be confrontational and personality to oppose, what is wrong. And we probably, if we really could reach out to that community, we probably would get more people of that mindset than we would get people who are atheists who want to talk about it, right? Because it is so scary to talk about that. I know that Pride specifically, when they really started driving their numbers up, is when they started bringing the allies in. Like, I don't have to be homosexual to think that homosexuals ought to be able to get married just like anyone else, right? Like, it is an irrelevant part of themselves, and everyone ought to be able to support that. But until they sort of said, hey, let's bring everyone in who feels that way, I don't think they really have the membership members that they needed to get things done. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, but it might be kind of niche. But this is an interesting combining of different things. I'm not from here. I'm learning more about Walmart and home office and the culture of the home office and about the chief diversity officer and all these initiatives, and that there's a pride group and there's a secular. This is like awesome. And I wonder, and really, I'm amazed I'm going to go back and tell everyone, like, you don't even understand. I'm going to be like, what? But I wonder, there are laws being passed right now and bills being considered in different states to exclude trans people from bathrooms that align with their gender.
Just passed in North Carolina, right?
Yeah, and Kansas is trying to pass one, and it's being considered in one of the Dakotas again, and I think there's going to continue to be a wave of these kinds of laws. And I wonder, considering their involvement with Pride or other people who've been involved with the Pride at Walmart and the kind of company Walmart is, if this is something that's been discussed. It's an issue that I'd like to see the secular community be concerned more about, even though we're talking about an extremely minority population. But as you mentioned regarding laws, exclusion and discrimination and hated groups that can't do things, like this is a small population that is sometimes murdered for being who they are.
That's actually one of the big initiatives that the Pride group at Walmart has right now. It's about trans rights. If you look at what their big initiatives are for this year, that's the absolute top of the list. It's acceptance and it's establishing rights. Now, because it is such a small group, I think they only have one actual trans member in Pride in the home office. But that is absolutely something that they are very passionate about. And I know that, who's the new head? It's not Jason anymore. Who is it? They just announced.
So maybe she's actually an ally. So I can't remember.
Yeah, they just changed who the chair is. But certainly if you go to their, do you work for Walmart? I assume.
Me?
Yeah.
No.
That's one of their big initiatives. And on our Connect site at work, they have a homepage very similar to ours, and that's top of their list that they're working on.
All right, cool.
I always talk, when I talk to people who are in senior leadership positions in the company, I always make it clear that my opinion is that when you have the ability to affect change for a positive, in a positive way, you have the responsibility to do that. And Walmart is an enormous company, and they have a lot of strength to leverage and to enact society change, right? When Doug McMillan came out, when they had the really terrible law here in Arkansas, and Doug McMillan came out and opposed it without beating around the bush and very clearly said what our company's stance was, I think that may have been the proudest I ever was to work for Walmart. I mean, that really was amazing, especially considering who the core customer for our company is. But it was the right thing to do. He had the ability to affect that kind of change, and I think he had the responsibility to do that. And I think it's great. I'd like to see us continue to do that. There's so much more that we could help with, but it seems like as a company we're moving in the right direction, especially over the last couple of years.
You're in the cusp, you're sitting on the cusp of change for your specific niche, which is corporate change, corporate companies in secularism. So you, and I'm not saying, I don't mean to put that pressure on you, but your group could make a difference for 30 years. And I don't know if you really fully, I mean, you
No,
really do.
that's
You work for Walmart.
right. Whenever I speak to people, because when you talk to people who are professionals, you have to give them the business case, right? You got to make it make sense to them, and I mean dollars and cents. And so here's the business case. In the next 20 years, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. 50%. Half of the people working are going to be millennials, and a full third of millennials identify as non-religious. That is the business case. If you are a company that is not seen as being accepting or even aggressively in favor of the non-religious, you are going to be missing out on 50% of your workforce. And that's always the argument that I make. That is a really big deal, and I absolutely agree that companies are going to start embracing that, or they're going to die on the vine.
And you could be the stars for change. I mean, you really could. You could be the example of one that being awesome. It's great.
Other questions? Yes,
I
sir.
apologize if you already answered this because I was out running around with chicken. Are there other companies in Northwest Arkansas, Addison, anything like that, who have secular organizations as well, or if we help them with it?
Not that I'm aware of it, and I think that we probably, as a group, need to do a better job of networking, right? And for that exact reason, I honestly don't know. But there's some really large companies here, so I would hope that they are, but not that I'm aware of specifically. Yeah.
I can say I have been to the Tyson headquarters, and I do know that on their front wall, there is a plaque that states that their company is based on a religious foundation of Christianity. So Tyson itself does have that stigma to it, where it has that plaque on their wall, huge, big, bold letters. You can't miss it when you walk inside.
I think I used to work for Tyson.
I am so sorry. But so that, if nothing else, that is one company that really, hopefully, if the workers fall on Walmart, maybe that could be an effective change, maybe grow the company. Baby Hunt is a little bit more secular, but there is, with the Hunt family themselves, nothing against them selling Hunt, you do one, but do have a slight religious factor to them as well through the Hunt family.
Well, it just, I mean, these companies are going to have to start looking into use of dollars and cents. I mean, legal fees and things like that, because eventually, this is going to be the hot topic in court. This is going to be, hey, I didn't get this job because I'm religious. I mean, you cannot be discriminated against because you're religious. Police, it's already there. So eventually, once everybody comes to terms with all of the LGBTQ and all of that stuff is done, we're next. And it's going to start costing them money, and it's a fight they're willing to fight constantly. Because like you said, it's going to be 50% of their workforce. It's going to get there. We have to be cool and push it forward.
Other questions?
I was going to say that Tyson, while there is a religious aspect behind it, they are supportive of people who are not religious. Good to say that. They do say that when they talk about religious as well. They do have a chaplain program, which is like a support program for their employees, but they also say that it's not, that it's open for people who don't have religious either. So it's that sound.
Yeah, no, the military, they have religious chaplains
They're
now.
very, very proud of their chaplain program. So,
Any other questions? Thank you all very much, and I hope to see everyone else.
Thank you again, Shon. Give him another big round of applause.